Hello, I'm Mbweha. You can call me Ben of Team Relentless, and this is the Scrapyard, where you can come to learn how to make something for your Star Wars Legion table. Today, we're going to be talking about how to make these big cardboard buildings made almost exclusively from the cardboard that comes as an insert for the larger unit expansions in Star Wars Legion, and then random pieces of other stuff that you just don't throw away because you're a hoarder. Let's get started and build these buildings. So the main material that we're using here is those cardboard inserts that you can see on the right side of your screen. These are just inside of all of the units that you buy, and there's a bunch of different sizes. If you've been collecting for a while, the older ones are a slightly different shape. The newer ones are, they have a shorter width. And you can see I'm using an old one on the right there and a newer one on the left. Also, some of them are taller than others. I'm going to make a multi-tiered one, which you'll see as well. So that things like the AAT are bigger boxes, they're taller boxes, which you can see right there happening as we're combining taller and shorter and different boxes. The adhesive that I'm mainly using is for this part is just PVA, which is model speak for Elmer's glue, any sort of white glue. Really, but I also am going to do a lot with hot glue and occasionally some super glue for some of the smaller bits. This part, what I'm thinking about as I'm designing these, I'm thinking about the height. I'm thinking about if I want models to be able to jump up, jump 1, jump 2, speeder bikes. Am I going to put ladders different places? I'm thinking of the shape of it to make sure that that the angles of the buildings aren't not very many right angles. And then after I've decided the shape of the building and have glued it together, then you need to trace the shape of the building onto another piece of cardboard and cut it out, and that's going to act as your base. What I did in that last little bit there was I glued some spackle onto the bottom to act basically as a ballast. If you have air drying clay like DAS, that works really well as a ballast down at the base too, so it doesn't fall over so easy, but I didn't have any, and so I just made do with some spackle. What I'm doing here is I've cut pieces of cardboard that I'm going to use as slats to support the roof structure. These buildings are, they're made of cardboard. They're not going to be strong enough that you can lean over on them or anything like that. They would break if you did that, but you want them to be sturdy enough that, they can get tossed around a little bit and hopefully are going to be strong. So to do that, I almost do it like it's a real building. You cut out little slits for the struts to go through, and then you slide them through. I have a really hard time with one here in a second. You'll see as I keep having to redo it. I just couldn't get it the way that I wanted it. And then I'm using some foam that I had left over from some packaging to kind of reinforce that as well. So it's got ballast at the bottom to weight it. It's got struts across the top that I'm going to be able to glue the roof to, and those struts are supported by whatever junk I had laying around. Here's the first use of hot glue. I will say that I screwed this up with hot glue. I forgot that when you use hot glue, when it dries, it sticks out a considerable amount. It doesn't disappear, evaporate, or slip into things, and I end up having to trim it later. The next step after you get the struts in there and secure is to trace the top of the building, and then after you trace it, you cut just inside of the line that you trace because you're trying to fit it inside of the actual roof. I like to do that if possible so that it's very obvious that something has cover. And I wish on these buildings actually that I would have set those slats, the slits for the slats, which is a funny thing to say, down further into the buildings. I wish that it was an even more obvious, clearly things up here have heavy cover when being fired at below, because sometimes new players especially have a hard time with that. And just so it's really, really obvious that there's a lip that someone's crouching behind or whatever. The other option would be to very intentionally not do that and have it elevated up above it, which is actually what I'm doing on this layer right here purposefully on this building, is I've cut it so that there will actually be just the slightest amount of overhang so that there's not a little wall there. And I'm doing that on purpose so that if you're on a taller building, you can't have heavy cover from a 2 millimeter piece of wall in front of the model. All right, the next step is to let all that dry. I think I let it dry for like 12 hours. Elmer's glue can take a long time to dry. And now I'm just taking other pieces of cardboard still, and I'm cutting them and putting them at angles on the buildings, and they just make it look cool. So you can continue to use those. And they come with those little cut slits in them, and those end up looking cool and giving depth to it. And then I cut out where I want the door to be, and I used a model. I've got a model nearby. I think Gideon Hask is somewhere on the table, and I'm using him as a way to gauge how big this door should be. If you just make a single layer door, it doesn't look nearly as good as if you make a double layer door. So here I'm just making a door frame, and then I'm making an additional frame within the frame and putting some little doodads on it, little triangles, and then a little panel that I intend to paint up. The next thing to do is to, make something on the roof that looks cool, and that is the lid to, I think, like an old, I have no idea what it is. I saved, for the last like 3 years, I've been saving interesting pieces of trash. And I finally got around to using them all and tossing out the remainder. So that's secured there, and just having a bit of something that's on the top to make it look more interesting is a big deal visually, but you got to secure it well, because you have to assume that anything that you put on the top of a building like this, people are going to grab it. So make sure that that's, got some super glue to reinforce it, as well as the PVA. And you need to think about what height that makes the building. Did you just accidentally make only one section of the building taller than height 1? Because that can create problems too. Again, just using trash. What can I use that looks cool? That's a old nozzle and an old, I cut down a soft contact case to make a little doodad, stick it on the side. Another something to stand on up there, make things a little bit more interesting. At the top, it's an old, I think that's a taco seasoning lid on the left there. And then from some laser cut materials that I had left over, some of the laser cut wood, cutting out pieces because they looked interesting. I saved those because I knew if I cut these down, they'll kind of look interesting and different and random in a way that it's difficult to achieve on your own unless you're a designer, and using those as points of interest. And then I saved some of the old like harder firm cardboard from other board games and use that, and that's a piece from, I think, a washer or it's an outlet cover, and I tried to use super glue and it didn't work, and so I heated up the hot glue gun and it worked better to use hot glue on that plastic piece there. And then other little pieces of lids, and trim them to try to make it look like they didn't come from lids anymore. And then this is the key. This is where the magic happens, where it no longer looks like cardboard because you spackle it. You just take spackle and you just get the spackle pretty much everywhere. And then it's going to give it a nice texture. This texture is going to allow us to dry brush later on in a way that's really, really effective, and it's also it makes it look like a worn building, which is what it's easier to make a worn building than a fresh, clean one. And so we do that. All right, so I let the spackle dry. You got to make sure it totally dries, and then I just sprayed the whole thing black. Now I'm going to use several shades of off-white dry brushing, and this is the most mesmerizing part of the video, in my opinion. I could watch this. Something about dry brush painting sped up I find very satisfying. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. So yeah, just dry brushing an off-white onto here, and you could do it whatever color you wanted, whatever theme you're going for here. But all my cardboard buildings are more of like inspired by like a Tatooine moisture farm situation, but they're not necessarily meant to be that. They can go on any type of terrain, and they look good in the jungle. They look good on a snow mat. They look good on a desert mat or urban mat. Anything looks fine. So just dry brushing, and then almost all of it just a simple white. And then the next thing I want to do is the red. These are, I kind of theme my buildings after Team Relentless for fun, and so I go, black and red and white is kind of the main theme here that we got going on. And so deciding what I want to pop out with red. I want the doors red. I'm going to put a little, some freehand stuff in different places. Just make some of the doodads red. Don't overdo it. It's if you don't want it to look like what I would disaffectionately refer to as clown vomit. You don't want too many colors on there, and you don't want the colors that pop in too many places. So just some of those little doodads that stick out, paint them a color to make them pop. And if you wanted to do a third color, I would use a complementary color. So in red's case, the complementary color is green. So if you get out a color wheel and do that opposite color on the color wheel, that can help things pop a lot more visually. The pieces of cardboard that I added that weren't part of the actual structure, but were like the cool bits, I went with like a gray, and my intent was to make them appear. I was hoping to get sort of like an oxidized, weathered, metallic look, and I didn't really achieve that. It ended up being too close to the off-white, and I wish I would have made them a little darker, a little more metallic. But that's okay, it happens. And then I felt like my red was too dark, and so I start brightening it up in different places. And then I named the buildings, and I stenciled this in pencil first once everything was dry. And then I went over it with, this is the only time that I should mention, use cheap paint for this until you get to the freehand works, until you get to stuff like this. But this is just really cheap acrylic paint that you can see there. I got it at a hobby store for it's like $2 or $3 for one big thing of that, and it'll last forever as long as you take care of it. I named the buildings. The building that I first wrote, that's Drod's Cantina, and for my teammate and buddy Ed, and then this is Ben's Bike Shop, which I was very pleased that I was able to integrate the B and the S on Ben's for the bike and the shop. I thought I gave myself a pat on the back. And then here's the Team Relentless logo that I was mentioning before, and then trying to make the door panels. At first I thought maybe I'd make the door panels pop with some orange. I didn't like it, so I just went with black again, and then trying to get some buttons on there. And that particular one gave me a really hard time. I think there was a little dab of spackle in a bad place. And we're just about done, and all of a sudden we've got, two awesome buildings. So that's how you build these. I hope that you learned a lot and were inspired, and know that you can, with some time and effort, make your own stuff just like this, which is a lot of fun, very rewarding. If you don't want to build them yourself, these two currently have been 3D modeled and are available for purchase on 6UP Supply. You can print them yourself, or you can buy them pre-printed. I'll put a link in the description so you can check that out at your leisure. But I hope that you learned a lot regardless. I'm Mbweha, you can call me Ben of Team Relentless, and this has been The Scrapyard.